So it turns out that one of the most important things that we need to do in our life is also one of the hardest things for us to do. And that is to keep the main thing the main thing. The reality is that all of us get sidetracked in life. And by that I just mean we lose track of what's really important. Because we know people who would say, look, and maybe this is even us, by the way, but we'd say, hey, in order to be a successful person, that means being a person of character. It means kind of making some sort of contribution to society to help other people. And yet those same people, again, maybe us, are running around chasing more worldly achievements. Or we all know people who are families who got themselves talked into prioritizing kids' sports above family meals together. Why? How do you end up there? Well, because it's hard to keep the main thing the main thing. I mean, all of us had that experience where we kind of wake up, and realize that you've let lesser things take the place of the main thing, and the main thing has been pushed out into the margins of your life. And it's not just us as individual people, but it's businesses, it's nonprofits, it's the government. A true story. Several years ago, the London Transit Authority started getting phone calls. They weren't just phone calls, they were complaints, people angry. And they were saying, hey, look, there are city buses who are driving by bus stops with people at them, and they're not stopping to pick people up. What is going on? And so the London Transit Authority issued a press release, kind of a famous or infamous press release. Here's part of what they said. It is impossible for us to maintain our schedules if we are always having to stop and pick up passengers. I was like, well, what? How does this work? But you see what happened is they let a lesser thing, staying on time, replace the main thing of transporting people around the city. I mean, the purpose of a bus company is not to maintain its schedule. It's to get people where they need to go. But this happens all the time everywhere. And it's why Stephen Covey wrote this. He wrote, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Well, of course, this happens to churches too, right? Which is why we have to take time every year to kind of come back and go, okay, look, what's the main thing that we are about as a church? What's the thing that really drives us? We call it our mission statement, but you could just say this is the main thing at the Crossing, to move the hearts and minds of more people to believe that Jesus is more. So to move. This is a process. Nobody gets there in one day, right? It's all a process that all of us are in. The hearts and minds. Our heart is our desires. Our mind, of course, is where we think, but those can't be separated. Like they work in conjunction together. So we're trying to enter a process of moving hearts and minds of more people. Like we've always got one eye on our coworker, or the person you go to school with, or your neighbor, the people who just moved into town, that we want them to have a relationship with God. We want them to be a part of a church community. So to move the hearts and minds of more people to believe that Jesus is more, that Jesus is everything you could ever hope for. He's better than anything this world has to offer. That Jesus is our hope and our rock and our security. He's our wisdom. He's our forgiveness. He's everything to us. And if we kind of have like a lot of great programs and lots of good meetings and more people are coming and it's busy around here, but more people aren't believing that Jesus is more, then we are like a bus company that's forgot to pick up passengers, right? Lesser things have pushed out the main thing from what is really important and what we should really be about. And if you get off track just the tiniest bit, it can have a huge impact over time. Imagine that you live in Los Angeles and you're Catholic and you want to go to Rome to see the Pope. Okay, so I'm gonna take a flight from LA to Rome. It should take me about 12 hours to get there and I'm gonna see the Pope. But the nose of your plane is off 1 degree. Just like a tiny bit. You wouldn't even notice it if you saw it. You'd have no idea. It's just off a little bit. In 12 hours, after flying 12 hours, you won't be in Rome. You'll be in North Africa. You won't be seeing the Pope because you're in a Muslim country. A tiny little difference that you can barely even see over time makes a huge difference. Well, we've been to church for 24 years now. If we get off track just a little bit, it's going to make a huge difference. That's why we got to return every year. Okay, what is the main thing around here? It's to help more people believe that Jesus is more. And then we pick a project every year that helps us accomplish that mission, helps us stay on the right track, make sure that we aren't deviating from our mission. So some years around here, it's meant that we needed to build. Like, that's what we needed to focus on. We needed to build another Crossing Kids wing. We built a student center. We added more seats in the auditorium. Why? Because it's our mission to help more people believe that Jesus is more, so we had to make room for them. Another year during COVID, what we did is we said, okay, we need to provide digital resources. In other words, we don't just want to help people when they're with us on Sunday morning, but all throughout their week. So we created all these digital resources, including 6 podcasts. And that helps us accomplish our mission of more people, because there will be 6 million downloads of those podcasts this year. Believe that Jesus is more, because everyone is designed to take you further in your relationship with God. Then there's the years that we just kind of focused on needs in our community. So in 2019, we raised $450,000 to pay off the medical debt that was crushing struggling families. $450,000 translated into paying off $50 million in medical debt for people who are struggling financially in 38 counties in Missouri. Or the next year, we raised $400,000 to pay off the utility disconnect list in our city. So these are all the people whose utilities are going to get disconnected because they can't pay their bill. And we said, don't cut off those utilities. We'll pay it. Then there's the year that we raised $400,000 to establish a multi-ethnic church in Ferguson, Missouri. It, of course, is a place that had a lot of racial unrest. And what they needed was a Jesus-believing gospel church that brought people of every ethnicity and race together. And then last year, we partnered with Coyote Hill. And we said, okay, our project this year is that we are going to focus on raising awareness about the vulnerable kids in the foster system. And many of you stepped up and said, what's one thing I could do in my family to help kids? Some of you were relief parents. Some of you became foster parents. Some of you adopted children. And then, of course, this year, in 2024, we raised $1 million to help build transitional housing for people in our community who didn't have anywhere to live. They were without a home. Not only do we provide the housing, but we provided holistic coaching to go with it. Now, all those projects, they were to help us stay on mission. Because when we care about the vulnerable, when we care about people in need, then that is us becoming more like Jesus, having the heart of Jesus, because he told us to care about the least of these. But it also helps us embrace more people in our community, to say we want you to come in because they are attracted to a church that helps people in need. See, anybody can call themselves a Christian. What we're trying to do is say we're the kind of Christians who love and sacrifice for other people. That's what we want our community to know. We love and sacrifice for others. So this year, we said, okay, what's going to be our project that keeps us on mission? And after praying and talking and praying, we said what we really want to emphasize this year is prayer. Prayer. We want to be people who pray more. We want to be people who pray more often, more biblically. We want to emphasize prayer this year because it helps us accomplish our mission. We're going to pray for more people in our community to come into a relationship with God, and we're going to pray that all of us go deeper in our own relationship with God. And if we could hang just one Bible verse over this next year, here's the verse we'd hang. It's from 1 Thessalonians 5. Paul writes, pray without ceasing. Other translations say pray continually, or pray constantly, or never stop praying. Pray at all times. But you get the point, right? Now, I'd say when I read pray without ceasing, that I feel guilty. Because I'd be the first to admit that in my Christian life, I've often been frustrated with my prayer life. I feel like I should pray more than I do. I should pray better than I do. I mean, I'm a pastor. Shouldn't I have that figured out? And I make these resolutions. Okay, this year I'm going to pray more frequently, more fervently, more faithfully, more biblically. And then I fail. So then I feel guilty. And then I make more resolutions that I fail again. And it just is this cycle that runs over and over and over. You ever feel that way? Like, do you ever feel like I know prayer is important, but I don't pray the way I think I should pray? You ever have that feeling in your life that you don't pray like you should? I mean, prayer is difficult for all of us. So if prayer is hard for you, join the club, because nobody is a natural at it. we go back to the time of Jesus and the original 12 disciples that followed him around, they saw him do all kinds of things, right? Heal people, raise the dead. They saw all kinds of miracles. They heard all of his teaching. Now, if you get to the end of Jesus' life, and they could come to Jesus and ask one thing, like, show me how to do this. Teach me how to, what would you have asked Jesus to teach you if you were there? Like, I'd be like, hey, can you teach me how to heal people? Because that'd come in really handy in my life. Or could you teach me how to feed people? Like when you fed the 5,000, can you teach me how to do that? Because I think it'd be a great business model for making me a lot of money. Or could you teach me how to calm the storm? Because I'd like to calm a lot of storms in the world and in my heart. But you know, the disciples, they didn't ask him to teach them any of those things. Instead, well, let's just look at Luke 11. Lord, teach us to pray. When they could have asked Jesus to teach them anything, what they asked is, Lord, teach us to pray. Why? Because they saw Jesus have a relationship with his Father. They saw him praying, and they wanted that. And they knew they weren't good at it either. Or maybe it's that prayer without ceasing, the without ceasing that kind of freaks you out. And you go, I don't do anything without ceasing. Well, is that true? Don't you worry without ceasing? And eat without ceasing? And scroll through your phone without ceasing, and buy online without ceasing. But when it comes to prayer without ceasing, yeah, I can't do that. That's unrealistic. Or maybe it's just like confusion. Like, how do you do without ceasing? What does that even mean? Well, Jesus shows us in Luke 5. It says, Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. So often, frequently, he made a habit of getting alone and praying. Is that what prayer without ceasing means? Well, yes, but no, it's not all that it means. Because I just went through and made a list of all the times that Jesus prays in the Gospels, just all the time that he prays. And what you find is it's a really long list. Like, we don't have time to go through it all. But a few of the times he prayed, when he got baptized, Jesus prayed. When he had to choose the disciples, he stayed up all night praying. When he was transfigured, he prayed. Before he healed people, he prayed. Before he raised Lazarus from the dead, he prayed. When he was on the boat with the disciples and the storm came and the disciples all thought they were going to drown, Jesus prayed. When the religious leaders and the Pharisees tried to trap him with their silly questions before Jesus answered, he prayed. When he sent out the 70 to represent him in the world, he prayed. When he was betrayed, he prayed. When he was on trial on trumped up charges, he prayed. When he was crucified, he prayed. When he was on the cross, he prayed. At the moment of his death, Jesus prayed. Jesus prayed without ceasing. And that means this: prayer was not just something he did. Prayer is the way he lived his life. And if you and I, if we want to pray without ceasing, then we stop seeing prayer as something we do and we start seeing it as the way we live. To pray without ceasing means that we can just talk to God. That becomes the way we live our life. And we can talk to him anytime. Like when you wake up in the morning, you can pray and praise God for all the love and mercy he's shown you in his life, for his power that holds the world together. When you drive to work, you can talk to God and talk to him about all the things that are on your schedule that you have to do that day. When you go to pick up your kids from school, you can talk to God about all the people in your life that you love and care about. Before big meetings, you can talk to God. You can ask him for wisdom before you make important decisions. You can ask him for courage before having a hard conversation. You can ask him for patience when your kids are driving you nuts. You can ask him for peace when life feels overwhelming. You can talk to God anytime. You can talk to him like he's your friend. See, praying without ceasing isn't complicated. It just means prayer is the way we live our life. But somehow we forget to talk to God. Somehow the children of God forget to talk to their Father who loves them. Somehow we think we're too busy. Somehow we get distracted by lesser things and forget to keep the main thing the main thing. Tim and Kathy Keller went to New York City, to Manhattan, to plant a church. And that church grew. In the most unlikely places, downtown Manhattan, a Jesus-loving, Bible-teaching church flourished. And as they lived their life and pastored the church and raised their family, they experienced the normal hardships that we all go through. Kathy developed a severe form of Crohn's disease that was incredibly painful and just completely changed the way she lived. And Tim developed a curable form of cancer. Curable, but still very hard to go through, and again, changed the way he lived. And, Kathy said, I'd always wanted to pray with Tim on a daily basis, but we just kind of never got around to it. Like, we said we'd do it, and then we wouldn't. You know how that goes, right? And so when they had these diseases, she just went to him and said, look, we've got to pray. Every night before we go to bed, we need to pray. And he's like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. And then they wouldn't. Right? Something else would take a higher priority, or something else would distract them from it. And Kathy looked at Tim and she said, Tim, imagine that you got a diagnosis, that you had a lethal condition that would kill you within hours unless you took a pill. You had to take that pill every night before you went to bed, and if you didn't, if you forgot to take that pill, you would be dead in the morning. She said, would you forget to take that pill? Would you ever get distracted from taking that pill? She said, Tim, we have to pray every night because I cannot make it. I cannot make it without God. I cannot make it without praying to him because life is too much for me. See, what Tim and Kathy Keller teach us is that when life feels overwhelming, what we must do is pray without ceasing. In 1833, almost 200 years ago, Jeremiah Lanphier moved from upstate New York down into Manhattan to start a clothing business. The best thing that happened to him while he owned that clothing business is that he went to a church nearby and ended up joining the church and became a Christian. His personal life was going so much better than his professional life because 9 years after opening up that clothing business, it went bankrupt. And Jeremiah Lanphier went from job to job until that church that he had become a Christian in offered him the position of what they called a lay missionary. Jeremiah Lanphier didn't have any formal theological training, but what he did know was that the city of New York was going through a moral decline. He'd lived there long enough to see that there were real problems in the city. The economy was booming, but the politics of the day, a lot of it centered around slavery. The politics of the day was ripping the city apart. And so in this new position that his church gave him, he was just supposed to talk to guys about Jesus, and that's what he did. He talked to guys about Jesus and invited them to the church. Nothing happened. Nobody was interested. So unsure what to do, he decided he would pray. And he took a little sign and he posted it all around the neighborhood where the church is. And he just said, prayer, weekly prayer, every Wednesday, 12 to 1, come as long as you can. First Wednesday, Jeremiah Lanphier shows up. He's by himself. Well, what do you do? I mean, he's discouraged, but I guess I'm going to pray. So I said I do. And so he prays from 12 to 12:30 by himself. At 12:30, another man joins him to pray. By the end of the hour, 4 more had come. The next week, 20 men came. The next week, 40. By the end of the month, the weekly prayer had become daily prayer, and thousands of people all throughout New York were praying. And that prayer movement launched into the whole nation, so that in 1857, what you found was that cities, major and minor, had people gathering to pray, and it led to the revival of 1857 to 1859. Not exactly the sexiest name, but a lot of cool stuff happened. 3%, during those years, 1857 to 1859, 3% of the American population became believers and got a part of churches. That's 1 million people. If that happened today, 10 million people would come to be Jesus followers. See, what Jeremiah Lanphier teaches us is that when you look around and you see the spiritual needs of the world, what you should do is pray without ceasing. When George Mueller saw the needs of the orphans in England, he prayed. Mueller was a pastor and a father of a big family. He had a lot going on. The church was growing, and he had started multiple ministries outside of the church. But no matter how busy George Mueller got, he never overlooked the needs of the orphans. See, in the 1800s in England, there were many, many thousands of orphans, but there were very few orphanages. Orphanages that would care for the kids, get them dressed, provide their basic needs, send them to school. And the ones that did exist, they charged room and board, which made no sense because orphans don't have any money. So what would happen is that businesses would have workhouses, the orphans would sleep there, and the businesses would take advantage of them, kind of a child labor kind of thing. So George Mueller said, I'm just going to pray. He didn't go out and talk to the people. He didn't go rally the troops. He didn't go raise any money. He just prayed, God, I want to start an orphanage. And he started the first one, and 30 girls were a part of it. Kids keep coming, boys and girls. And so George Mueller kept praying, never asked for money. He never talked about his needs. He just prayed, and God provided what he needed to start more orphanages so that at some points 10,000 orphans were being taken care of by the ministry that he started. He tells a story about one time the house mom came to him and said, we don't have any money and we don't have any food. And he was like, well, okay, send all the kids to the dining room. The kids were all ready to go to school, but they were hungry. So they go to the dining room, 300 of them, and George Mueller comes and he prays and he thanks God for the food. But of course, there is no food. Knock at the door. A baker shows up and says, I woke up in the middle of the night and started baking bread, and I think you need this. Another knock at the door. A milkman comes. My milk cart, the delivery cart, just broke down. And I think all that milk is going to go to waste. Could you use it? 300 kids went to school well-fed that day because George Mueller prayed without ceasing. We have so many partners in our community that we get to work with, just outstanding organizations. And I'm sure you've heard of some of them. Maybe you've heard of Granny's House. If you haven't, you should have. It works with young kids in public housing. Maybe you've heard of Love Columbia, one of the people we partner with a lot. They're a great organization. You've heard of them, but you know how they started? They started with these two women, Jane Williams on the left and Pam Ingram on your right. Pam had grown up in public housing in Kansas City, and so she had a heart for kids who had her same experiences, and Jane just has a heart to help people. So they wanted to help people, they weren't sure what to do. So here's what they did. From 1996 to 2001, for 5 years, they knocked on people's door in public housing and asked, what could I pray for you? Knock, what could I pray for you? They'd pray. Knock, what could I pray for you? I'd pray. For 5 years, they did that. Jane said that people took a little bit of getting used to this, right? Had people knocking their door. They didn't really know anybody. So they made these free prayer sweatshirts so they wouldn't look weird. I said, Jane, you looked even weirder, right? Because nobody wears a free prayer sweatshirt, right? But they went and they said, eventually everybody wanted them to pray. So she told about a story about a woman running through the snow barefoot to catch them to say, my granddaughter is being bullied at school. Can we pray? Can we pray? They tried to go to the nicer neighborhoods, the wealthier neighborhoods, but there's nobody to answer their door. They just would ignore them. So they just went back to lower income neighborhoods. They got to where they would go through the paper and look to see who had been arrested. And then they'd go to their houses because they knew they had needs that needed to be prayed for. Jane said it was the most fun that she'd ever had in her life. She told me that there was a time that her and Pam were standing there talking, and somebody, I don't know if it was at their church or somewhere, walked up to them and said, I can't believe your husband's let you do this. Like, your husband's let you go out into public housing and knock on doors and ask people to pray for him? And Pam and Jane looked at each other and started laughing. I go, what were you laughing at? She goes, we never thought to ask our husbands. We just did it. Never crossed our mind. See what Jane and Pam teach us is that when you want to love your neighbor, what you do is you pray without ceasing. It doesn't matter if you feel overwhelmed with life, you pray without ceasing. If you see spiritual needs in your community, you pray without ceasing. If you see orphans and people who are suffering and need help, you pray without ceasing. When you want to love your neighbor, you pray without ceasing. So what we're going to do as a church for the next year is we're going to pray for each other without ceasing. We're going to love each other by praying for each other. When you came in, you were given a card. And on that card, on one side, it says, without ceasing. And on the other side is a place that just says, pray for me. And I want you to write down a prayer request. Just write down something that you want somebody in your church to be praying for you. And then when we leave here, there's 2 boards. One out here in the foyer and one over by the cafe. And they just say, pray for me. Without ceasing. We're going to take our prayer requests, and we're going to post them on those boards, and then we're going to take one. See, we're going to post one so somebody can pray for us without ceasing, and we're going to take one home so that we can pray for them without ceasing. And by this way, we're going to love each other. Maybe some of you know exactly what you want to pray for. Like you're writing already because you know your prayer request. And then some of you probably not so much. Like, what should I put on here? Is there something you want to learn, something you think God's teaching you? Write that down. I want somebody in my church to be praying that I would learn. Is there some challenge you're facing, something that is too much for you to bear, to hold up by yourself? Write it down. Is there something you don't have enough faith to pray for? Like you've been praying for it for so long and your faith has run dry and you just need somebody else in your church that you can tap and say, can you start praying? Because I can't pray anymore. But I need somebody to be praying. In the first couple services, there's some moving prayer requests. Posted out there on the board, Nate asked people that you pray to have a relationship with the Lord. An anonymous card said that their daughter was experiencing great anxiety and it was affecting her marriage. She asked for prayer. Brittany posted a note that said she got disowned by her family. Her fiance is an atheist. She doesn't know where to turn. Would somebody pray for her? You can put your name on it, or you don't have to. It's up to you. But what we have to do is we can't make it. We can't make it without each other. We can't make it without God. So we're going to pray for each other without ceasing. Take a moment now and write your prayer request on your card.